Carl with the hood up, outfit open. So he told them the room. Apparently there was no one, and both of them were worried that someone may have gotten in somehow. So they both went to the room to investigate. And when they went in, they found that no one was in there, but all the glassware in the cabinets was completely destroyed. To this day, I refuse to go into the room by myself unless strictly necessary, because it always sends a chill down my spine and has a weird vibe. The next story takes place in a different room of the hotel, and after the events of the first, just for context. On this particular day, we only had 2 people check in, and since the hotel is small, this occurrence happens every so often. As a result, I had to do a few extra tasks around the hotel, one of which is going into the empty rooms and turning off all the lights because people will leave the lights on more often than you'd think. So I went into every room and made sure all the lights were turned off, and went on to finish the rest of my tasks for the evening, because I could clock out, which is around 11 p.m. But because it was a slow night, I was able to finish my tasks 2 hours early. Normally, I will be allowed to clock out early.
Just a random BS test of your tips there, mates. Did you purchase these tips? What? No.
B samples BS Sarge. Thanks, $39.99 a month.
Here's a tip for free. Download the Sportsbet app.
Out to clock out early, but the person running the shift that night was a stickler about clocking out early. So she made me double check all the rooms to make sure the lights were out before she'd consider letting me clock out early. I checked every room, and as I expected, all the lights were turned off, except for this one that had all the lights on. I was shocked when I walked in, because I knew for a fact I had been in every room and turned all the lights off. So, the fact that it was turned on freaked me out. But as I was walking out, a light by the bed suddenly switched on. I was now creeped out. I hadn't heard of people seeing lights coming on in their room, so I knew something was up, and just left that room. The next story happens earlier this year, and is one that still creeps me out to this day. I was finishing cleaning this one room, and was going back to our supply room to grab stuff to clean it. As I was walking back to the room, I looked down the hall and saw a woman in a white robe and brown hair walk towards her room. I go in the room to check and see which room I have to clean next, and it just so happened that it was a room down the same hallway the woman was walking. I was mad because what this meant is the woman came back to her room earlier than expected, so I would have to go to her room and ask when I could clean her room. Now this may seem odd because it's a boutique hotel, but we try to be more personal and give that extra interaction with guests. I go to the room and knock on the door, expecting her to reply, but after 30 seconds didn't get a response. I waited for 2 minutes before I used my card key to enter in case something had happened to her, and as I opened the door slightly to call out her name to make sure it was okay to proceed, I don't get a reply. I then enter the room cautiously and look around to find no one. I immediately start to panic because I knew for a fact I saw someone walk this way to the end of the hall and that there were no other rooms she could have gotten into, and I just ran out the room and closed the door. I got to the front desk to speak to my co-worker about what I saw, and he didn't seem fazed. Although he hadn't seen her himself, he says there are other people that have seen the Phantom Lady. The following story happened in the basement of the hotel, which alone looks very creepy and gives you a very unwelcoming vibe. The basement is the heart of the hotel though, because it's how we're able to transport items without any guests seeing, storing stuff as needed, and also has some offices. Employees have always just reported feeling uneasy walking through the halls, especially at night, because sometimes it feels like you're being watched. This incident happened on Thanksgiving night of 2018. I only remember because after I finished my tasks for the day, I had to help set up Christmas decorations. I go to the one storage area we call the dungeon, which got its name due to being dimly lit and having a really musty odor, to grab a few wreaths. I spot the box containing the wreaths and grab two. As I'm walking out, I hear a whisper in my ear as clear as day, "Wrong one." I immediately jump back, because I was the only one around and had no idea who or what could have made that noise. But I just went back to the main floor to set up the wreaths. Turns out, the one wreath that I bought couldn't be used due to lack of ribbon, tinsel, and there being no holly or berries on it. Within an instant, I knew that the voice was trying to tell me that I was bringing up the wrong wreath, and I was shocked that I was being helped out. The following story takes place in the basement too, although it didn't happen to me. The story goes that an employee was walking down the hall of a basement and saw what looked like one of the maintenance workers in the basement, but this was well past the time their shift ended. She called out to him asking why he was still there, when she suddenly heard a crashing noise coming from a storage room next to her. She goes to see what caused the noise, and there's a hole in the door like someone punched through it. She goes back out to talk to the guy, but he was gone. The next story happened to this one employee who was doing a turn-down service in a room. For those of you unfamiliar, turn-down service is when your room is refreshed and you're given champagne and chocolate-covered strawberries. At least that's how we do it. However, we also add candles to the room. 2 hours later, the guests that had the turn-down service called to complain about the candles in the room being out when they arrived. Go figure. This last story is a bit more wholesome. For the first 15 years the hotel was open, all of the groundskeeping was managed by the guy called Sam. From what I've heard, Sam loved his job, because as he saw it, he was the artist of the hotel, and helped add to its beauty because he would make sure everything was perfect. Grass was even.
Oh, fuck. Die. 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 Grab. I have to tell you how to that I got it. Off camera, I decided to go to, more supply drop. Grenades, pretty much more weapons, Gang, you heard. Okay, press play or bond.
Our beds looked stunning. In the winter he made sure the parking lot was always clear of ice and snow. Sam really took pride in his work, but sadly passed of a heart attack 8 years ago on the grounds. It just hasn't been the same since. However, but believes it would be around the same time as the bed incident. One thing that is interesting to note, though, is he has never once been told of any tactile experience. Now comes the darker information I was told in the entire hotel's run. There's only ever been one person that passed on the hotel's property, and it's possibly the reason for the woman in white. As some context, beach was another tall steel security gate through which I could make out a narrow sliver through the light of the rising crescent moon. This made sense in a way. Under Mexican law, all beaches were public spaces. The property line ended at the wall. My thought was interrupted by something Keith said. The phone doesn't work. What? Yeah, we were tired, so we were going to call for a taxi to take us into town to a restaurant, but the phone doesn't work. I felt a...
Meet Tubi, your go-to app for free streaming. With 3 times fewer ads than cable, Tubi has over
Town to a restaurant, but the phone doesn't work. I felt a little nervous about that. None of us had cell phones. Keith, however, didn't seem bothered. The owner's great. He lives in Puerto Juarez. I'll get in touch with him after we get back from the pyramids tomorrow night. Dorothy and I hadn't planned to take the long trip to the pyramids. We both planned to ease into the vacation by taking a trip to the beach and getting tanned. I wasn't comfortable spending the entire day without a lifeline. It wasn't an insurmountable problem, as I started working out ways to maybe take a cab into Puerto Juarez in the morning for Keith and see if I could fix the problem. A loud buzzer sounded, and all of us jumped. The same echoed through the entire main floor, like a game show buzzer sounding at the incorrect answer, except for longer. As soon as it stopped, it buzzed again. Keith rose from his chair and walked over to a small alcove, presumably to open the gate. "Don't open the gate," Dorothy and I said in a duet. Kirk and Greg laughed. Keith stopped and shot us an odd look as the buzzer sounded yet again. I'm not. He opened a panel in the alcove that contained a small security monitor and intercom. He squinted to see what was on the monitor. I stood up and walked over. As I did, Keith muttered, "Stopped." The security light remained on for 5 minutes until a lack of motion reset the compound in darkness. We had to adjust, and it was a frightening moment as Keith scanned the security cameras for a long while. There were no signs of them. Kirk suggested they run up the road or beach, but then the kid from the monitor walked up to the front gate again, a big grin on his face, and was carrying a handgun, displayed clearly for us to see on the monitor. He shook the camera and pushed the talk button. "No, I don't think you're gonna sleep tonight." He spit on the camera and walked away.
He's just a kid, so
None
kick
of us
him.
did, except for Dorothy, if you count passing out from
He's just a kid. You can beat the kid.
We estimated we had about
If you
7
have a
hours
gun,
until dawn. Kirk
he's a
argued
threat.
that everyone
So
who
beam
came
the
out
fuck
was
up
either
and put him
asleep
in the
or
hospital.
celebrating their victory over the
Maybe he'll
tourists
think
back at
twice.
whatever
Play with a
clubhouse
gun,
they shared.
dickhead he.
He wasn't ready to sleep though. We sat in candlelight to get the best view outside the windows.
Maybe
Greg
he'll
patrolled
think
upstairs
twice.
for a while and then joined us in the dining room. The doors were open.
Grab
and
a
the
knife,
screen
if you
shut
have a
so
knife.
we could hear anyone
You're
gathering
at
out
your
back,
house.
but only
So
heard
grab a
the
knife,
gentle roll of surf.
Stab him.
If they
Keep
come back,
stabbing
the
him
lights will go on, Greg
until
said.
he bleeds to
If
death.
the police drive by and see that rock on the wall, maybe they'll check in. To be honest, we hadn't seen any lights, except that of the moon and the ocean since the gang departed. It was a beautiful
But
scene.
no.
To be honest, I
You're a
tried to
pussy.
relax
You
and have a
didn't
few
think about
Coronas
that,
to
did
help.
you? Dumb
But we
bitch.
told stories of our glory days to keep awake, and even had to shush ourselves from keeping from waking Dorothy.
Dumb,
It
dumb,
was
dumb,
around
dumb,
3 in the
dumb
morning
bitch.
when the security light out front goes on again. We didn't have the
Dumb
energy to
hoe
be
she is.
startled, but responded immediately. I checked the security monitor.
She's a
It was a
dumb
couple of
hoe,
people there
and
to
he's a
collect the
dumb
ladder
hoe
and the rug.
too.
Pulling the rug down triggered the lights, and they quickly ran off back up the road into the dark. Tiny pixels of light
Dumb,
showed in
dumb,
the
dumb,
distance
dumb,
as they
dumb.
switched on flashlights. The
Dumb
rest of the morning remains a fuzzy memory.
as
I
fuck.
may have drifted off, and may have the others, but none of us slept. Sunrise gave us all the confidence, and Keith immediately conspired with Greg and Kirk to power nap before Paula returned to take them on the all-day trip inland. I said we should go to the police and get the phone fixed before the 3 of them left the property in the hands of an exhausted me and already terrified Dorothy. Shortly after dawn, Dorothy came downstairs in a swimsuit, walked past us without a word and walked into the pool. She dunked herself and began
Got the spirits, but no mixes. Well, I know who can fix ya. Get Jimmy, get Jimmy.
Fuck
and
off.
walked into the pool. She dunked herself and began fishing stones out from the bottom. I helped Keith make breakfast and things began returning to normal. Keith agreed to postpone the trip until we could file a complaint and get the phone settled. We ate and agreed to ask Paolo to put us in touch with the authorities. When the buzzer sounded again, we all jumped a little, but it was Paolo. We let him into the compound. He was dressed for
Oh,
comfort,
God.
ripped jean shorts and an old golf shirt with sandals. We explained the night before and he didn't seem surprised, except for the part about the phone being out. He walked with Keith around the side and confirmed his suspicion that the line had been cut outside the wall. The line could be fixed, but just as easily be cut again. With this done, Keith phoned the owner to let him know what had happened. According to Keith, he feigned concern and promised to use his connections in Cancun and Puerto Juarez to increase police patrols the next night and hand over the security tape to the officers who would come and investigate. Convinced this would solve all our problems, Keith, Kirk and Greg left the house late, but to put in the full day's hours away at the Chichen Itza site. Paolo pulled me aside and handed me a small metal case. He patted me on the shoulder as if confident I'd know what to do with it. Inside was a handgun with 2 magazines. Startled, I took it inside and wiped it down for prints, but I kept it in the kitchen. Dorothy said nothing all day, getting out the pool and showering. She sat on the patio outside the dining room and read a book. When the police showed up 4 hours later, I brought them in and explained everything. One of them spoke English well enough and explained the house we rented had been owned by a local drug trafficker. He wasn't exactly a kingpin, but he was able to keep a nice residence until his life was terminated. It was brought up by a local businessman, but tourists, for some reason, didn't like the idea of being this far away from the protected tourist zone. The kids were probably locals with nothing better to do than harass Americans, and we should relax and have a good time. They didn't even want to see the playback. They just took the VHS tape and wished us well, assuring us that a car would drive by at least once an hour overnight. I didn't mention that a lot could happen in an hour's time. I kept checking the phone line, as if the sudden lack of a dial tone was my first alert for trouble.
Go, buddy.
I thought that if they
Again.
could cut the phone, they could probably cut the power almost as easily, but I didn't share any of this with Dorothy. I made lunch, but Dorothy didn't want to eat. She didn't want to talk either. She'd sat tensely in the sitting room with her book. I collected the stones from the pool area and piled them by the door. I cleaned up the debris and then spent some hours soothing my nerves with beer, Jimmy Buffett songs, and a network of pool needles serving as a raft. The guys never settled on a time they should return. Paolo said not to even try because they had to drive through the jungle and there might be any number of delays or detours. It was best to be home by sundown. So when the sun fell behind the trees that second night and they had not returned, I started to get concerned. There had been talks of playing a D&D adventure or just some card game that night, so their intention was not to be out too late. Dorothy had taken a nap in the middle of the day, but never went back outside after her swim. She returned to her chair with another book and went right into it. She refused dinner, but I made her something anyway, hoping the smell would just jumpstart her appetite. I felt like a well-treated prisoner. People walked along the road outside the compound, sometimes peering into the upstairs window to catch a glimpse of the tourists. Others lounged on the beach beyond the gate. It was probably safe for us to go out there, but we weren't taking a chance. In the end, the night fell over the house again, and with just Dorothy and me inside it. When the security lights went off again, it was around 8 in the evening. I had drifted off. It was the front side of the house, and I didn't see anyone outside the wall. When I got to the front door and looked out the peephole, I saw one man standing in the yard. He didn't have a weapon in his hand, but I wasn't sure if he was armed. He just stood there in the floor light staring at the front door, then to one side of the unused garage, and then to the downstairs bedroom on the opposite side. Dorothy got up and went to the phone. There was a dial tone, but dialing 911 left her with a dead line. She tried a few more times without success. At that moment, the buzzer sounded. Fearing another attack, I retreated to the security monitors and saw Paolo's cab outside. I buzzed them through. When the gate began to move, the man in the yard fled to the back of the house. It took a while for the car to get inside, and I moved to get the weapon from the case in the kitchen. The man raced to the back gate, as I suspected it was accessible from the inside as he threw it open. As he did, about 5 men rushed forwards, only to be stopped by the man inside and motioned to run, which they all did. With the rest of the gang back in the compound, Paolo told us he radioed police when he saw a bunch of creeps outside the wall. They were at the market and were on their way. The 3 men were deeply tanned and a little drunk from their experience, which they promised had a moment similar to the night before. Soon after, the police arrived outside the compound and they interviewed Paolo and the rest of us. They had Polaroids of the people they caught near the marketplace and took our word when we positively identified them as the man in the yard and the others trying to get in. It was all they needed to not only arrest them, but to round up the other kids that harassed us the previous night. Settling in, I returned the weapon to Paolo, but he offered to sell it to me for $50. I can't say if I took him up on it or not, but the rest of us felt a lot safer for the remaining 12 days of our trip. We even took to the beach as a group. It took a while, but Dorothy began to settle in. After 3 nights of no issues, we all slept through the night and had the adventures we'd been dreaming of for 8 years. This story takes place when I lived on my old property. I was a little boy, maybe 8 or 9. You see, the cul-de-sac I lived in was a fairly nice neighborhood, nothing crazy. My room was across from my parents, just down a long hall and next to my sister's room. My brother and I shared rooms and a bunk bed. Everything was fine until my sister reached her teen angst phase. Then came the doll. It was a creepy-looking porcelain doll with a black tutu and had a punk rock kind of motif, and she loved it. She got it from her godmother, a woman we no longer speak to. My brother and my mum and I never liked the thing because it gave us the creeps, but hey, it was her doll. However, slowly but surely we began to see a change in her. She was beginning to become more reclusive and angry with my mother for no reason at all, and even cut herself in front of me once. Weird, yes, but nothing quite supernatural. Then she began to sleepwalk. At first we thought it was normal, maybe just stress from being a teenage girl, I don't know. But she started to creep me out. And because of this, I began to lock the door at night after my brother fell asleep. And on one of these nights I heard her get up from her bed and slowly walk. I was in my top bunk, mind you, watching under the door when I saw her shadow. See, as my room is across from my parents', I couldn't tell if she was standing there in front of my room or my parents', but it was still very creepy, and she stood there for an unnatural amount of time. On the last occasion, we all awoke one morning to a knife under my parents' bedroom door, and this just made them flip out. They weren't scared, they were more concerned about my sister being nuts and homicidal, since she'd been acting so strangely. Things went on for a little bit, until one day the doll disappeared, and my sister came out furious, huffing and puffing, but no one in the house seemed to have an inkling about its disappearance. And so, life went on, and I never knew what happened to it, until I asked my dad about it years later, and he enlightened me. It turns out that my godmother was heavily into black magic and Santeria, and had a deep hate for my mother over some petty squabble they had before my father and mother were married, and held a deep resentment for her. I guess firstborn females of the family is important in Santeria, and so when she saw an opportunity, she gave my sister that horrible doll we hated. But what actually happened to the doll was the funniest part. My mum is super religious, and I guess at some point she had soaked the doll in holy water and left it in the trash for the garbage man to take out to the dump the next day. Another funny thing, my sister never sleepwalked again. I've had a few frightening encounters over the span of my life, but nothing quite as intense as one that took place on a night during my senior year of high school.
3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1, and 3, 2, 1, and 3, 2, 1, and action. 3, 2, 1, and action.
Oh, sweetheart, and I was looking for any reason I could find not to sequester myself into my computer room, as I so often did. My friend Mia, who lived in a neighbouring community, had invited me over to her place to hang out with her and her brother. I was a socially awkward teenager, and Mia being a fairly recent acquaintance, I accepted on the condition that I could bring along a frequent companion of mine, Robert. He was always prepared to hang out, and I could confirm his presence there before even asking him. She was hesitant of bringing another person round, but when I promised her we'd set off some of Robert's fireworks, she agreed. Mia had conditions of her own, stressing the importance of calling her to come pick us up as soon as we arrived at the transit station. I thought it was a bit of an odd request. I had been to Mia's house before, and it was only a short walk from the station. I didn't think to ask her why, as I was just pleased to be going anywhere. Oh, and you have to bring your fireworks, I told Robert. After grumbling, he gathered up the small cachet that he had stashed under his bed and we headed out. Robert and I arrived at the station around 11, and I did as Mia had instructed. Not expecting an invite that late in the evening, my cell phone was left uncharged, with enough juice to let Mia know that we had arrived.
Where can I
As
sleep?
Robert and I whiled away the time singing 80s tunes
In
an
my
off-key
room for
rhythm,
now or
a
on the
black
couch?
SUV with tinted windows
Got it.
came streaming into
I'll
the
build your
parking
house
area
off
next to
camera.
the station.
And I'll
Swerving
build a
wildly and
fence
honking
off
before it
camera
shot
too,
off
like a big
into the
fence around our town. Cool. Oh, I know, baby.
suburban
Press play.
community we were heading towards. Mia arrived shortly after, and we made our way towards the schoolyard. Robert was still a bit prickly about wasting the last of his fireworks, which was fairly uncharacteristic of him, as he presented himself as one of the most habitually apathetic people I had ever met up until that point. We had set off a handful of fireworks. A few of them were duds, but most of them did what they were designed for, attracting attention. Another black SUV came barreling down the road by the school a few minutes later. This one had a collection of balloons tied to the interior of the car that flew out a rearview window, battering against one another as the SUV came to a sudden halt. Mia's face held a look of knowing concern that I didn't entirely understand. "I'll be right back," she told us. I held my breath from a distance as I witnessed a figure hop out of the passenger seat of the SUV and approach Mia. I let out a heavy sigh of relief as their greeting, while out of earshot, was warm. There was a rapport and friendliness not commonly reserved for foreboding strangers you meet, with the hour creeping closer to midnight, and the lights in the surrounding homes growing increasingly scarce. Mia was the type of gal you couldn't help but like. She was bright, funny, talented, and never did much to offend anyone. She treated everyone on equal terms.
I'm thinning hair and smashed my confidence. I've just stopped dating altogether. Thought, this is crazy. Sad, really.
Make today your turning point. The doctors at Ashley and Martin will regrow your hair.
In a moment, Todd's mom will read her son's internet browsing history.
What?
Aloud, please.
Supermodels on trampolines.com.
And never did much to offend anyone. She treated everyone on equal terms, and a natural byproduct of this is collecting friends of every high school archetype. Some of those archetypes were one of the ones I was all too familiar with. the jocks, bullies, and bad seeds, the latter of which her district high school had a notorious reputation for. By that point in my life, I was already content with the knowledge that the flaring tempers between most individuals of every identifiable clique would simmer with age, but there would always be the select few that never quite got over the thrill of illicit dealings and physical violence. Their behavior would escalate, and they'd step into the criminal lifestyle at a young adult, where their actions became less excusable. I was and still am a tiny male at 28 years old, never growing beyond 5'4", and an easy target for such a person. I had the reputation for being a mischievous but laid-back slacker who could take a punch but couldn't throw one, and I relied on the former trait to diffuse tension between situations outside my tribe. It didn't always work, but it allowed me to skate by relatively unharmed for most of my high school career. Mia embraced the stranger in a hug before they parted ways. The stranger got back into the SUV and peeled off. When she returned, I asked her what that was all about. That was a friend of mine from St. Francis High. They're out celebrating his buddy's 18th birthday and driving around and beating the crap out of people walking by themselves. You're alright if you're with me, but I think we should probably head back to my place. Fine by me. I'd rather not be party to some kid's twisted adulthood initiation rites as he proves his machismo to his buddies while they take turns packing my face in. We arrived to Mia's house, but the mood had turned pretty sour and contemplative as we sat with very little to discuss aside from the obvious. We got about 20 minutes into a movie before Mia's father walked in. Mia, it's 12. Time to say goodnight to your friends. Mia explained the situation, but being an honest student with overly invested parents can sometimes mean bearing the burden of strict rules. One, being in bed by 12. The other, no safe harboring for teenaged boys overnight. Christ, what had we gotten ourselves into? Mia told us that there were 4 of the SUVs driving around. She asked us to be safe before saying goodbye and locking the door behind her. Robert and I slowly walked off the porch and into the cul-de-sac. A disappointing evening, but it happens. I took my cell phone from my pocket to trouble my best friend for a ride, but had forgotten that I didn't charge it earlier and the battery had since died. Robert didn't bother to carry a cell phone with him and communicated with the few people he did hang out with over MSN Messenger. We took inventory of what we had left with us before taking off towards the transit station. My pockets were virtually empty.
Poor shit. Super dumb show. Get the fuck out of here. Know your place. Price.
Save for my wallet, Robert had a single remaining firework in his possession, along with his Zippo lighter. There was a house down the street that I recalled was being renovated, with one of those industrial-shaped disposal bins out front. I leapt inside and re-emerged hefting a 2x4 with a few nails bent into it. Robert laughed at the visual. Call me Buford Pusser Jr. I am walking small, I cracked. Robert had his Zippo and a firework at the ready. I'll shoot this in their face, he said. It sounded as if we were in high speed, but the buses might still be active. The neighborhood we had started in had enough walkways, bike lanes, and tree cover that we could sink our way through the shadows for a while. We took our time choosing the most secluded and unlit passageways, which in hindsight I realized did nothing to help our nerves. At one point we came up to an intersecting walkway that we were familiar with in the daytime. The passageway ahead of us was lit overhead by a single yellow streetlight, before fading into the yawning mouth of pitch darkness. We stood there, agonizing for several minutes over
All I
whether or not
remembered,
we should
I was fucking at school. Now I'm here. Oh, good. Okay, press play again.
another route, or stay the course, listening for any sound of movement on the other side. We briefly contemplated camping out for the remainder of the night before opting for another detour. The night's silence
Hopefully
was
we're not
punctuated
dead.
every so
Hopefully
often
this
by
is
the
not
squealing
the
tires, shouting,
I know.
or the sudden
Hopefully.
acceleration of a vehicle.
Yes, they were the
Then
sucker
we
for
reached the
dead.
main road.
I
Not
know,
only
right?
one of
They
the
were
main
fucking
roads in the
sucker for
area,
dead.
but one of the main roads in our end of town.
Yep.
From there on, there was little cover, nothing but houses, buildings, and a large empty parking lot, all illuminated by street
But
lights.
if that's
at
the
that
case,
moment, felt
if
more
one
like
tree
the
is what it
halogen
is,
floodlights
you
they
can't
shine
do
on
nothing
escaping
about it.
prisoners as
Yep,
they rush
that's
across
true.
the yard to freedom.
We're
There
dead.
was little traffic
There's
at this
nothing we
point
can
in the
do.
night, so if one
Yep.
of the SUVs did come down the road, we would not go unnoticed, and there'd be virtually nothing to stop them from doing what they were intending to do. We listened for any sign of obnoxious motors revving before we took off across the
Daddy?
road and into the parking lot. Less than a minute later, we arrived at the
Do
transit
you smoke
station.
weed?
We quickly
Of
checked
course
the
I do.
posted bus
What
times,
about smoke?
but as indicated
Yes?
by the digital clock
Cool.
outside,
Here's
all
a
the
joint of
buses had
smoke.
made their
Keep a
final
couple of
run.
nugs.
We hopped
Here's
into
a
the shelter
wider.
at
I'll
the
be
train
spare
terminal,
wider.
but the doors
Thanks.
had already
You're
been locked.
Let's have a
We'd have
joint
to
now.
stick to the main
Let it
road
smoke. Don't fuck.
until we made
Down.
it to the bus
So
trap.
joint.
The bus trap was our safe haven. What's unique to this bus trap is that it was right under a tightly constructed underpass that divides one community from another. After years of drivers still risking the odds to make their trip shorter, the underpass had been fitted with added precautions, cement blockades, and a metal gate that only opened for buses. This would increase our chances of making a clean getaway if the birthday boy and his pals sped towards us. Robert and I flinched to every distant sound, unaware of whether it was an ordinary motorist on their way home after a late evening, or the assailants we were so concerned with running into. We began to think that maybe we were overreacting. There was a good chance that someone had already phoned the police on them, and they had taken off to another area to avoid detection. Maybe they'd gone home, or better yet, gotten arrested. We let our guard slip as we reached our old junior high, starting to think that the worst-case scenario we were preparing for was already behind us. That I was carrying a cumbersome piece of wood only looked like a jackass, though Robert was still armed with a firework and his Zippo for nothing. This is where I remember the set of walkways leading straight through the community towards an elementary school, which was right by the bus trap. I had walked it plenty of times before, and with the streetlights spaced out every 60 feet, we'd see them from a mile away, but they'd see us too. What we were greeted with instead were long expanses of burnt-out streetlight, another sparsely lit tunnel of shadows, and nightmares. We started down the path, because what other choice did we really have? Robert flicked his Zippo open as much as he could, still careful to conserve his lighter fluid in case of an actual confrontation. The walk didn't last long. The oversensitive backlight pointed. There's no way they didn't see us. Crap! I shouted at Robert as we doubled back towards the elementary school and rounded the corner. We both had to think fast, as the road they were on was only a 15-second drive at the speed they were doing. We ran down the street along the elementary school, but found no cover. I heard the engine grow closer to us with its seconds of turning into the street. We were out of time, and I pointed to the only cover I could find, a side yard fence. No accompanying front fence, no attaching hedge, nothing. Robert and I lied down on the grass against the fence, long like boards and stiff as corpses, our respective weapons
What can
at
I
the ready.
be?
I have
When you
never
make
felt
up
my
the
heart pump as
town?
hard as it was at that moment,
It's up to
tightly
you.
gripping the 2x4 while I
I'll
watched
be
Robert
on the big
position the
rocking at
firework
hoodies.
and unclamp
Can you
the
build
zipper.
hoodies?
As
Yeah,
if this
sure.
was going to do
Cool.
anything. We
I'll
really
be one of the
were
workers
chumps.
there. Cool.
The SUV
I
slowed
know.
to a roll
Daddy.
as it turned the
You got that
corner,
right.
the headlights
Daddy,
reaching
Daddy,
down the
Daddy.
road as they
Well,
were
we
searching
put
for us.
Darwin.
Convinced they wouldn't find us in the car, they parked. They parked at the edge of the property, right next to us.
How many dicks have we
The
had in
headlights of the
real life?
SUV were peeking out
42
just
dicks to
beyond
me.
the
No,
fence.
43,
We
including
were
my
beyond
daddy,
scrutiny.
but my actual daddy.
4 doors popped open,
Oh, good.
and within a few seconds, each to each other, feet kicking up gravel as the birthday gang murmured to one another and began to search for us. I noted at least 4 sets of footsteps and a couple of indistinct voices.
Just a random BS test of your tips there, mates. Did you purchase these tips?
Fuck
At least
off.
4 sets of footsteps and a couple of indistinct voices. We were definitely outnumbered. My mind flashed through all the numerous times I'd been pushed about at school, laughing good-naturedly as I refused to fight back in futility. I knew everyone who did this to me, and this humanized me to them enough that they never pushed it too far. These people
Do
didn't know me.
you remember
They
what your
weren't aware
mum
of the
looked like
bullshit
or your dad
persona I
looked like
assumed.
in
The
real
odd
life?
guy who was
No,
alright with
I don't.
me.
All I know
They
is
didn't
of
know I
mum and dad.
pretended to think I was funny.
Oh, good.
These guys wanted to hurt me.
Who knows,
They
you could be my
wanted
dad.
to hurt me and
Who
my
knows?
friend. This is it, I thought. This is the
All I
moment you
remember
quit being
is I
such
have
a
a
coward
wife.
and you earn your
I
own
don't remember
respect.
I have children
I
or
gripped
not.
the 2x4
Oh, good.
tightly enough to dig tiny
So who
splinters
knows, you
into
might be
my
my
hand
dad and I
and
might be
just
your
listen
daughter.
to my heart thump
Yep,
as
who
my blood
fucking
boiled
knows?
with whatever rage
If
I
that's
could
the
summon.
case,
I would
who
only have a
cares?
slim
Yep,
opportunity to
who
surprise
cares?
them before they take us
If
down.
you're
And I
gonna
hoped
fuck
that Robert
daddy,
would get his firework
you got them lost,
off soon
I guess.
enough to buy us some